newly elected mayor of New York City, Mamdani, has drawn some attention on Chinese social media. Most videos about him really highlight his identity as a socialist. It makes sense because China is one of the few socialist countries in the world right now. Chinese netizens aren't really worried about whether Mamdani's idea of socialism is the same as what they have in China. Instead, they just have fun imagining what a socialist America might look like. Is New York about to open its own First People's Hospital? That's what a lot of big public hospitals are called in China. Are we going to say a rural credit cooperative pop up in Manhattan? In China, that's a kind of state-owned rural bank. If the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union once symbolized the victory of capitalism, at this moment, Chinese people are feeling a renewed sense of pride in their own system. I saw one comment that said, "I believe that Chinese-style socialism will see its spring all over the world." There's a kind of hope in that. And what I find interesting is that while American political elite opposing Mamdani try to stir up fear of socialism and communism and go into red scare mode,
he's the
communist, not socialist, communist. He's far worse than a socialist.
Ordinary Chinese people who've actually lived through a planned economy are pretty chill or even optimistic about the whole idea. Of course, there's another major type of comment: skepticism about whether Mamdani can actually deliver on his campaign promises. When Yura said, "Slogans are just slogans, policies are policies, let's see what he actually does." Another wrote, "Don't just listen to what he says because of his identity, watch what he actually does." All of this really shows that, for most Chinese people, practical results matter more than ideology. Over 40 years ago, Chinese people moved past the unrealistic dream of 跑步进入社会主义, sprinting into communism, and became more cautious about political campaigns. They started to be skeptical not just of the radical left, but also of capitalist ideas on the right. For example, a lot of Chinese people aren't really sold on Western-style electoral democracy, even though it's something many in the West are proud of. They don't think that holding on to one political ideology will solve every problem. And they also don't believe that any single political system can make everyone happy. Some scholars call this pragmatic spirit. So what is this pragmatic spirit? At its core, it means supporting whatever leads to development, prosperity, and a better life, rather than being trapped by abstract ideas or rigid ideology. Some scholars trace this attitude back to China's traditional culture. For example, Confucius thought values practical concerns. When Confucius was asked how to serve ghosts and spirits, he replied that we should first learn to serve living people. But the widespread embrace of pragmatism in China is more deeply rooted in modern history. After 1949, a series of political campaigns, especially the Cultural Revolution, brought enormous uncertainty and trauma to society. In the aftermath, people became disillusioned with extreme political movements and rigid ideology, and there emerged a strong desire for tangible results, less political struggle, more to eat, and a stable life. For most people, this isn't seen as a formal philosophy. Instead, it's captured in a famous line from Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. This sums up the practical mindset that has shaped China since the reform and opening up. Launched in 1978, reform and opening up was a turning point. Before then, China was one of the poorest countries in the world. Since then, rapid growth has brought China to the threshold of becoming a high-income nation. Looking back now, it's clear that reform and opening up was the right decision, but at the time, it was a bold and risky move. Before this shift, the country's priorities lay not in economic development, but in political struggle. What kind of political struggle? Given the global context of the time, the Cold War between the US-led capitalist camp and the Soviet Union-led socialist camp, it's easy to see why Chinese society was so focused on class struggle. China followed the Soviet model of socialism and adopted a planned economy. The core idea was simple. Almost everything was publicly owned, and the government, not the market, decided what to produce, how much to make, and how to distribute goods. The goal was for everyone to have similar incomes and living standards, so egalitarianism became the norm. Capitalism, with its class divisions, were seen as the enemy of socialist ideology. Typical features of capitalism, such as private ownership, private businesses, free market transactions, and wage labor were all targets of criticism. From 1966 to 1976, the Cultural Revolution drove this struggle to a fever pitch, plunging the country into chaos. China wasn't just struggling internally, its national strength was weak, and after its relationship with the Soviet Union gradually deteriorated. In the 1960s, China faced serious security threats, including the possibility of nuclear confrontation. All these pressures, inside and out, made change not just necessary but urgent. In 1976, Deng Xiaoping, the man behind China's economic transformation, came back to power. He had been purged from leadership more than once during the Cultural Revolution, but eventually made his return. In 1978, he announced a new direction: reform at home, opening up abroad. The government was determined to focus on economic development. But a change is never easy, right? The main challenge was how to boost productivity across all sectors of the economy. Take the countryside, for example. After 1958, rural China adopted the people's commune system. Land and tools belonged to the collective, and the farmers worked together. In theory, food and money were shared based on work points. The more you work, the more you earned. But in practice, it doesn't matter if you work hard or just went through the motions. Everyone got about the same. Marrying farm work was tricky, and people didn't want to give their neighbors or relatives low scores. Plus, most of the grain was taken by the state, leaving very little for the farmers themselves. It's no wonder farm productivity stayed low. In the cities, the economy was dominated by state-owned enterprises. Urban residents got their housing through their working units. A job was assigned for life, what people call the iron rice bowl. It was secure but hardly inspiring. Changing such a rigid system was never going to be easy. Reform is a bit like surgery. If you cut too aggressively, you risk harming the patient, causing social chaos, and ending up with failed reforms. This was especially true for China, as the country had only just begun to recover from years of intense political campaigns. By contrast, in the late 20th century, the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries tried to abandon their planned economies overnight through radical reforms. Without exception, this led to upheaval and long-term economic decline. So the reforms were carried out gradually. In agriculture, the household responsibility system was introduced. Land still technically belonged to the state, but farmers now managed the plots as family units. As long as they handed over a set quota of crops to the government, they could keep and sell any surplus on the open market. My mom used to say that after her family got their own land, they worked it with meticulous care, flattening and tending the fields so where you could lie down and watch the stars. The joy was hard to put into words. It really shows the difference in motivation between working for the collective and working for one's own family. Beyond agriculture, rural, township, and village enterprises began to take off. These were collectively owned businesses managed by township or village governments. Unlike state-owned enterprises that were run by higher-level officials and strictly bound by the production plan, these rural enterprises had much more flexibility. Most importantly, China began to permit small private businesses, self-employed households to exist step by step, recognizing and allowing the private sector. In the first 10 years of reform, China's economy grew quickly. Per capita GDP increased by 7.5% a year, but growth brought challenges. State-owned companies struggled, workers were hurt, and rapid development caused inflation. But in the end, China overcame conservative tendencies, stayed committed to economic reform, and carried its pragmatic spirit through. In 1993, the country officially announced its decision to establish a socialist market economy. To end, I want to share an image, or rather a small detail, from China's reform and opening up. Before 2010, local government performance in China was often tied to GDP growth. This created a huge drive to attract investment, so much so that in some places it turned into an all-out, everyone jumping on the bandwagon effort. Every government department, even those unrelated to economic development, like environmental protection or education, would be assigned investment targets. Civil servants will sometimes tap into their personal networks, reaching out to relatives doing business in Hong Kong overseas or in wealthy coastal cities, inviting them to invest or help their local products. It may all sound a little over the top, but this really was a reality during the early stages of China's rapid economic growth. When we talk about the Chinese spirit of pragmatism, I can't help but think of my grandparents, who were all hardworking farmers, toiling in the fields and raising their children with dedication. I also think of my parents, who in the 1990s shuttled between our inland hometown and the coastal cities, driving trucks to transport goods for export. They worked hard, saved what they earned, and made sure I could get a better education. At its core, I think the spirit of pragmatism is about wanting a better life for yourself and your loved ones. I hope that no matter how intense the political climate gets, people can always stay rational and make choices that truly lead to happiness. If you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe my channel. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.